Welcome back to the Denver Dzogchen podcast. I'm here once again with Joseph Wagner, and we are here today to talk a little further, kind of an extension of our last talk of Guru Yoga, to talk about devotion, because it's such an important aspect of the path and something that is not well understood in the West, I think in general, and in particular, how it relates to our progress and what we're really doing. All of these things I think are so important to flesh out. And I think there's probably nobody better to talk about this than Joe. So Joe, welcome. And thank you. Please introduce this topic for us.
Can you imagine if in the whole world there was no one better than me? The Dharma would be like right before it was extinguished. That's not the case. But I do I do feel happy that I understand a little bit about devotion just from my own experiences. So I'm happy to talk about it with you and our listeners.
Great. So, to me, the Guru Yoga, in some ways, the Guru symbolizes this true nature of ours on the outside, right? And we long for this, right? We wouldn't even be on the path if we didn't have some part of ourselves that was longing for this thing that we know we have or know we want, but we don't quite know what it is. But the spiritual calling itself is really devotion, right? Like the Guru is embodying this thing that we long for so deeply, and we seem to think that it's outside of us somewhere. And so Buddhism kind of uses that to get us there. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about this process.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's mostly in our tradition, in the Vajrayana tradition, where devotion is held so to be absolutely crucial. And the unification of your mind with the Guru's minds in all of the, if we say 4 schools of Buddhism, or if we say 5, if we want to include Bun, it's a skillful method found in all of those schools. It's not found in the same way in the Mahayana schools. And although, of course, everyone has devotion for their teacher in the Theravada and the Mahayana and Hinduism, and it's like all has that. I think our take on it might be a little different. My own experience is that it is entirely possible to practice Buddhism, in my case, for 5 or 6 years without having anyone talk about devotion. I was practicing Zen at the time, and in Zen, the teacher plays a key role. So it isn't that the teacher-student relationship doesn't exist, of course, but that emphasis was never placed. And in fact, I don't remember ever hearing the word devotion in this context until I got involved in the Vajrayana.
Yeah. And coming from a Christian background, which many of us do, we have something like devotion is an important part of the path. I would say, for me, the thing that I enjoyed the most about church and Christianity was the devotion. It was the singing. It was the calling on this thing, because something in me knew that this isn't right and this place isn't right. And there has to be something greater. And this great love for that thing that maybe we couldn't even put our finger on is cultivated in this tradition intentionally. So we are doing prostrations, and we're doing mantras, and we're doing prayers, and we're trying to not only like have this devotion but increase it more and more and more. Why would we want to do that? And is that some kind of like subservience to a king or something like that?
I guess this could be a feeling that people have. I'm glad you brought that up right here in the beginning. My experience, which is the only experience I got, is when I was studying Zen, I studied with a few different teachers, a few Chinese teachers in Taiwan who were very advanced and gave off a lot of the same kind of vibe, I guess, as Tibetan teachers, full of love, seeming incredibly wise, 100% there for you, and so forth. And they seemed like extraordinary people. It was interesting. I was friends with an English monk who now lives in Bhutan. Some of you might know him. Shenpen Zangpo is his Tibetan name. Steve Powell. He lives in Bhutan, student of Dzogchen Khyentse and many other masters. But at the time, he was a Zen student, and we met living in Taiwan. When I told him I was going to go to Nepal, he said, "You really should meet this master. His name is Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche." And at the time, the name meant nothing to me, and I had very little interest in the Vajrayana. But through a series of very much auspicious connections and so forth, I met Tulku Urgyen. And when I met him, I saw in him, and this was not a conceptual thing, it felt like a revelation of that which I had been looking for during all these years of seeking, mostly in Zen, but before that in general sense in Taoism and so forth. I saw the manifestation of that in his presence. I felt that as soon as I met him. He said very little to me, but it made me realize that a couple different things. One, that the Dharma was just as alive as it was at the time of Shakyamuni, something I didn't realize. I kind of thought it had been like going downhill ever since, and maybe there were still teachings and there were still masters, but, when you relate, my friend Steve, I should say, the way he told me to see Tulku Urgyen, the way it convinced me was he said, when you meet a Zen master, sometimes you feel like they really have something. And I said, yeah, I know that feeling. And he said, when you meet a Tibetan master, and that's all he said. And when I had that experience, I thought back to what Steve had said, and I thought it's much harder to give rise to devotion when A, your tradition isn't emphasizing it, and B, the master doesn't appear to you directly as a kind of Buddha. And these days, it's a little harder for that because there aren't as many of the old timers. The ones who grew up in Tibet are fewer. But that was my introduction to devotion, because in seeing Tulku Urgyen's face, and hearing his words, something in me was awakened that I had been seeking the whole time. I had been looking for something to do spiritually. And to see it manifested externally in someone in such a complete way, and to feel the resonance with some part of myself, that I feel like that was really my introduction, not only to devotion, but to the path of Vajrayana as a whole.
Yeah, and I had similar experiences when I met Keeling Rinpoche. It was like he was so present that my mind was like without thoughts when I was in his presence. Um, but a lot of people struggle with this, and maybe they haven't met somebody who really knocks their socks off with their realization, and maybe because they have too many concepts, too many doubts, etc. So what does a person do who feels like they don't have faith, that they don't really trust it, that there's all these stories about scandals, and they just feel like this is maybe kind of some medieval tradition and you shouldn't be like bowing before a person. There's a lot of doubts people can have about this.
Absolutely right. I have seen this up close, both from the side you're talking about with people with a lot of resistance or some, a more prosaic way of looking at things. And I've also seen those same people in some cases be utterly transformed simply by the presence of the Lama. It seems to me that you can't force it, right? You can't make it. What the teachers say is the way to develop devotion for the lineage and for the lineage masters is to read the biographies of past saints, and the traditional one, of course, is the biography of Milarepa, which gives you automatically have tremendous compassion for the hardships that he went through, and incredible devotion, if not for him as a person, since you didn't meet him as an idea of what a practitioner really should be. So I guess if you're asking, like, how does one start this, it's probably wise to read some of these biographies. Milarepa's is extremely accessible. I thought the biography that Nalanda put out of Marpa was really powerful. I read that many years ago and it had an impact on me. The first Vajrayana book I read was Crystal in the Way of Light, which is kind of Namkhai Norbu's sort of Dzogchen autobiography, talking about meeting his teachers. And those things definitely opened something in me that made my progressive deepening of devotion possible. But it was really the teacher. It wasn't books, it wasn't ideas, it wasn't hoping or something. It was meeting a teacher with whom I obviously had some kind of karmic connection, and also someone who is very, very developed. So I suppose I would say that if our listeners, are living in a state of Sam Harris inspired semi-doubt. I like Sam, but he's a very practical guy, not more an atheist than an actual practitioner of our tradition, at least from my perspective. No offense to him or his, he's done a lot of real good, but you want to have as open a mind as possible, and you want to try to meet as many lamas that seem interesting to you as you can. I mean, obviously, if you hear someone's name and your hair stands and this is like a clear sign, you got to meet that teacher if you can. And this has happened to me many times, even with lamas who I heard about 10 years ago and still haven't met and still pray to every day, even though I have no connection, never talked to them on the phone, only seen pictures. They don't know who I am. But once that devotional aspect is awakened, then it's very much easier even for dead teachers. So I guess that there's really a listening to stories of great masters can sometimes awaken that faith in one. Of course, meeting them is the very best, and I recommend that everybody try to meet teachers like Keeling Rinpoche. Right now, who am I to judge? But I always recommend Garchen Rinpoche because from my perspective, those Nangchen lamas, all of whom were related to each other, in their lineages, if not their family lineages, Garchen Rinpoche and Adi Rinpoche and Tulku Urgyen, all these guys, they lived in the same area. And of those masters, Garchen Rinpoche is still alive. He's here in Arizona. Yeah, whether you can go down there and meet him or not, I don't know. But having not been to the Garchen Institute, but having met Garchen Rinpoche, I feel confident if you just went to the land and had the right kind of openness or attitude, or even hopefulness, even if you're very full of doubts, you might still just think like, may I have an experience that will help me to see what devotion really is. I think he would be a good one to meet because it seems impossible to meet him and not be touched by his incredible love. And that love automatically makes you fall in love. And devotion is a process of falling in love.
Yeah. And even just watching his videos can be profound. And then the biography that For the Benefit of Beings is a documentary. There's also one about Dilgo Khyentse. Those can be really powerful because you can really see, you see like Dilgo Khyentse touch people's face and it's like heart melting. He's amazing. And one piece of advice that I would share is that what I learned how to do due to the blessings of the lamas, was to navigate the world with curiosity more than doubts. Like instead of thinking it is or it isn't, like I'm an atheist, like the Sam Harris approach, there is nothing. Like that's a thought, and that thought blocks things, right? So instead of having the thought there is something or there isn't something or this is real or this isn't real, just get rid of those thoughts and just stay open and trust yourself that you're not going to be duped. You're capable of entertaining different ideas and possibilities without making up your mind about it, and then be open to having the experiences that happen. Because I think a lot of what happens is that even if people do encounter something, they block their own experience because they immediately go into their head about it. Was that real? Was that not real? Am I being tricked? Is it just my own emotionality? Like they analyze themselves and remove the powerful experience they may have even already had. So instead, learn in life to just navigate it with like openness and curiosity instead of trying to pin everything down, because one of the ultimate messages of Buddhism is emptiness, which is really no position, right? Like not getting stuck, because we just tend to collapse onto an intellectual position as Westerners in particular, because we've been trained to do that. And then that having that mental position blocks all the other possibilities that we could be having.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It might be a little bit of a, not that you're not right, I think you're absolutely right, but it might be a little bit of a tall order to instruct people to put their rational mind to the side. This would feel very invitation to being led into a cult or something like that,
Yeah.
And so I guess that if we're really talking about methods for developing the special kind of insight which can see that aspect of these teachers that is the same as our own awareness and is the same as the Buddha's awareness, the best one, the one that makes the most, that has the biggest effect and is the simplest, is making aspirations. And we might as well just talk a little bit about how to make aspirations. Aspirations have two parts. Aspirations have a wishing part and they have a letting go part. So for our listeners, this can be used for any kind of thing. You want your child to be accepted into the college they want to go to, then you can make the wish, may my child be accepted into Harvard. And then this is like knocking and pulling back an arrow on a string of a bow, right? Now, if you leave it right there, you just pull the arrow back and then you just let the arrow down, put both of them down. That doesn't have as much effect. What you want to do is you want to think, may my son or daughter get into Harvard, and that's like knocking and pulling the arrow back, and then totally let go. Whether you know how to meditate or not, just don't do anything. And that is like letting go of the arrow. When we I'm kind of into archery, so I use an archery example, but when you're shooting an arrow, there's as much a letting go as there is like the effort of putting the, knocking the arrow and pulling it back and aiming and all that stuff. What you have to do after all that's done is let go. And in the same way, for meeting teachers and connecting with the Nintik, the heart lineage, which is what lies behind all the official lineages and reading transmissions and stuff, the actual mind-to-mind transmission, which comes down to us, Khyentse Sangpo, Guru Rinpoche, to us, through these teachers, to really meet with that, you make aspirations. May I meet a teacher with whom I have a karmic connection? May I be able to put down my doubts and have a direct experience, and then let be. Don't have to let be 1 hour. You just let be 1 second. It's fine, right? You don't have to let go. You don't have to hold your hand like this for a half hour after you shoot the arrow, right? Just 1 second.
Yeah. And in my experience, the other thing that worked really well was Guru Rinpoche practice, because we have the 7-line prayer, which is really this powerful prayer because Guru Rinpoche, the Dakinis themselves said this will call him to Tibet, right? By reciting this prayer, if you set up a feast and you say this prayer, he'll show up. In my experience, reciting a lot of the 7-line prayer will call in a lama to your experience. This has happened to me multiple times where I was doing extensive recitation of that prayer. And I think this prayer is open to people. It's not like a restricted thing. So you could say this prayer as a way of calling the lama to show up for you in your life in whatever ways it shows up. And I found this to work really magically. I've had several of my most important teachers come after an intensive period of recitation of that and the Vajraguru mantra. So this is another method that might be useful.
I mean, we as Westerners, we have, as you explained before, I thought very nicely, we rely mostly on our conceptual mind, right? Our sem in Tibetan, the thinking mind, the planning mind, the reflective mind. This is just what is required to be a modern person. We might as well use that along with these other sort of more esoteric methods if we really want to figure out what devotion is. Most people know what devotion is on some level. We have a very democratic view in America, which is that's still in place, which is beautiful. And one aspect of that is that everyone is equal, which of course they are, right? We all are people and we all have rights and so forth. In Tibet, they see it a little differently. In Asia, generally, they see it a little differently, that there's a more of like a hierarchy of being, depending on how developed someone is. So I would encourage our listeners to allow the possibility to be there that there are people much more advanced than most of the people we know. If you have that possibility in your mind, it opens part of your mind to seeing those qualities when you meet the teacher. Otherwise, you have to constantly be like, they're not that special. You're like pounding them down to be just like us, or emphasizing the scandalous nature of some of these scumbag lamas, whatever. That is not very hopeful in terms of connecting, because what you're really trying to connect with is not the physical form of the teacher. It's not their voice or their experiences or something. It's what lies behind that. A real guru, a real master in Vajrayana or any other tradition is like a hole in the universe. They are like HOLE, where you can see through them to the actual Buddha nature. So you could say it's a whole. You could also say they're a mirror to show your own Buddha nature. It depends on your view, and both are equally true and simultaneously true. But in order to encourage this, we should use our discursive mind. And what does that mean? That means if we want to meet a Lama who we can have devotion in, then we should ask around, who are the great Lamas? And then we should make a plan to try to be at those teachings or go visit that person, or even just offer a kata, if you get to see them, or even watch a video, like you said, watching Garchen Rinpoche's biographical sketch, for the benefit of all beings. I mean, certainly makes the tears roll down my face. I've seen it a bunch of times. Using our conceptual mind to put us in the flow, it's kind of like if you're doing wealth practice, you're supplicating a wealth deity. If you're doing that in a cave in the middle of the Sahara Desert, then it's going to be hard for the money to get to you, right? You might have all the blessings, but how exactly where's the link up? So we can use our conceptual mind, our regular way of approaching everything in the world. If you want to learn how to rock climb, you're not going to learn it by going to a sauna. That's not going to do it, right? You got to go to a rock climbing gym. You got to take a class. You got to find a friend, this kind of stuff. Same thing here. You're interested in increasing your devotion by meeting a master who really shows, the truth in their very way of being, then put yourself in the way of that, right? You got to put yourself in the flow.
Yeah.
Same thing here.
Well, and part of the problem, I think, for many people is that I don't know if they know what they're expecting, but it's not necessarily 100% obvious who has these qualities. It takes qualities in you to recognize the qualities in them, as you hinted at earlier. And I think this is some of what Nundro's about, right? It is preparing our mind for this possibility so that we can recognize it. Because I know a lot of people probably already have teachers. And I know people who have teachers who they struggle with confidence and seeing their teacher with this kind of faith. And so this is something that can be cultivated in addition to just trying to find the right person, right? We can also purify I know, I had some amazing magical moments with Keeling Rinpoche in the beginning, but I know my path has been like this, I've been around him a lot. So sometimes my faith is higher and sometimes it's lower. But as I've gone along the path and done Nundro and done a lot of Guru Yoga, in general, it's gone up. And so now when I see Keeling Rinpoche, it's mind blowing because I've cultivated my faith, and my pure perception in him is stronger, and I have less doubts. And he's shown me over time that he's consistent and not, he's not falling into these ordinary traps and demonstrating himself to be a scumbag. So because of that demonstration, my faith has increased over time. So maybe you could talk a little bit too about preparing ourselves, or if we already have a teacher, how to see that teacher with more faith and not have so many doubts and all of that.
Good question. We could say that the hallmark of the Vajrayana is pure perception, in the same way that the hallmark or essential point of the Mahayana is love, bodhicitta, and the hallmark of the Theravada is renunciation. We can say that in Vajrayana, the method is pure perception, and the outcome is pure perception. And the more we're able to cultivate a sense of the purity of internal and external phenomena, then the easier it'll be to see these qualities in a teacher. And in fact, you can see them in all kinds of people. I'm surprised as my own extremely limited amount of compassion as it grows, which is about, not growing too quick, unfortunately, how much compassion I see in others, how much kindness and love I see in people. Sometimes I'm just so struck by people with their pets, or people with their kids, or, just even people just interacting with strangers. You can be really struck. That's because I'm trying to cultivate that in myself. So in the same way, if we want to see the teacher as a Buddha, it helps to have a teacher who is a Buddha and knows it, right? That's the best. These days, that's hard, right? And even, many of the really famous lamas, you can't even get close to them because they're just so busy. If your teacher is someone like Dzogchen Rinpoche, I mean, I don't know how one does that. In the old days, you could just hang out. Those days are over, and he has hundreds of thousands of students. So it becomes more on the side of the practitioner. And by cultivating a kind of open, relationship with our mind, where we're not trying to force it in any direction, and simultaneously putting ourselves in the way of the teacher, watching videos, reading about them, reading about old masters, to open up that channel and feel that devotion. You can also start with, let me finish this first. By doing that, then when we come in contact with the teacher, just as you're saying, sometimes we can catch a glimpse of the special qualities in there. And then by, I think it's good in some ways to sort of think about those experiences, talk to other students of the teacher about their experiences, and that causes your little devotional flywheel to get moving, right? And the more it's moving, the easier it is to see those qualities. And that's also because, those qualities are becoming more available in yourself. It's not I think the easiest way is to meet someone who you automatically have devotion for. And the easiest way to do that is to make continual prayers. May I meet my Tserap Leki Lama, my karmically destined teacher. And just by making that aspiration, you do it the same way as before. May I meet them, and then let go. And then again, may I meet this person in this life. Then not only are you more likely to actually come in contact with them, but you're more likely to realize it when you are. Because it's actually surprisingly easy to come in contact with even a great master and be like, well, they have a head and I have a head. They're wearing clothes, I'm wearing clothes. What are we doing here? And I have a friend who has a wife who's not a practitioner, who had the opportunity to meet an incredibly great master in Tibet. To my mind, the most impressive human I've ever come across. And when I asked her about that experience, I was like, wow. She said, yeah, I just couldn't get it. I went in there with another monk who was translating, and that guy, he had tears rolling down his face, and I didn't feel anything. And then the Lama gave a blessing and didn't have any effect. This is probably just lack of cultivation, right? For practitioners, we're constantly cultivating. What are we cultivating? We're cultivating devotion toward the guru, toward all beings who are more advanced than us on the path. We're cultivating compassion for all those who are like us, lost in confusion. And by cultivating that in an on purpose way, every day, every session, then we become more able to see outside of our normal spectrum, right? It's kind of like the visual spectrum, right? Most people can only see a very narrow bandwidth, but there are some people who can see a little bit into the ultraviolet. And so they have easier time with psychic stuff and this kind of thing. Their bodies are made that way. We want to have as wide a vision as possible in our own selves. So to do that, got to do it every day. We got to make prayers, right? Just pray, may such and such happen, and then letting go. This really works. And if you want to meet a teacher you will have devotion for, that's the easiest way. May I meet my karmically connected teacher, and may I recognize it. Because as you said, it's easy to wander through, meet someone and be like, well, whatever. And then not realize that, here was your big chance. So I think it takes a personal cultivation on a daily basis. Doesn't have to be long, but just making these prayers, may I feel more devotion. May I feel more compassion. This kind of stuff, it really has an effect, right? I don't know if it's our subconscious or that aspect of us, which is already enlightened. I don't know, but whatever it is, it opens up through requesting. So that's probably the best thing that people can do in order to deepen their devotion to an existing teacher or meet a teacher who they will have automatic devotion for.
Yeah, and I think this also ties into that concept of samaya that people often are confused about. But one of the easiest ways and most important ways to practice this, I always think of the quote you always share from Tulku Urgyen, that in this path, doubt is of little use. So when you notice thoughts about maybe my Lama isn't so great, or maybe my Lama's normal, or whatever, when those thoughts come up, treat them the same way we treat thoughts in shamatha. Let the thought come up and let the thought go away. Don't grab onto those thoughts. To a huge extent, this is keeping your samaya, not grabbing those thoughts, letting that doubt proliferate.
You're absolutely right. I think this is of crucial importance. We don't want to practice entertaining, seeing the teacher as an ordinary person. This doesn't mean we put blinders on. Some teachers really are having a hard time obeying the rules, and those people need to be called out. I'm totally in favor of that, and I am praise those who've had the courage to stand up and talk about these things openly. I think that's awesome. But from our perspective, Smaya is a whole issue that we can't talk too much about it. From our perspective, though, we want to try to see the teacher as purely as possible. Now, if we don't probably shouldn't name names, but even people who've studied with lamas who have fallen very far from grace, some of those people have tremendous devotion for those teachers. And it's not that they don't see that they had those faults. You are looking for a special quality, like a gem in the heart of the teacher. And any lama, I would say probably every lama, every authentic lama, certainly, and even some non-authentic lamas have this aspect. And if you can identify it, then you can negotiate your way along the path without falling into a blind kind of devotion. They never did that. They do it only for their students. These kind of weird lies we have to tell ourselves, while still having tremendous, authentic devotion for that aspect of the teacher that is connected to the ultimate lineage. And I think that we have to be looking for that. We have to be looking for that in ordinary people, because everybody's got kleshas, everybody's got bad habits, everybody's can be a jerk, But if you only look for the good in people, as Garchen Rinpoche tells us to do, we will see a lot more good. And it doesn't mean we totally go, oh no, that person's not a bank robber. Clearly a bank robber. It's not like that, right? But it's being able to see things in a balanced way. I want to say along these same lines, the listener, you, me, we are the authority. We decide whether a teacher is worthy of our devotion. It isn't someone other that's doing that, right? I might say Garchen Rinpoche, and somebody else might meet him and be like, just like the person in Tibet, right? For people who are really big figures, who are extraordinary, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, most people recognize, there's something special about this person. But I bet you there are millions and millions, maybe tens of millions of Chinese who don't, right? Due to the instructions they've received about this demon in the form of the Dalai Lama. This is just their words, right? The government's words. So it's really up to us. We are the authority. If you don't feel devotion for a teacher, find another teacher, right? Yeah. It's much easier when you feel devotion.
Yeah, and protecting that, I saw an interview with Pema Chodron about Trungpa Rinpoche, and I thought she put it really nicely. Somebody asked her about his alcoholism, and she said, how did he have these amazing qualities and also have an alcohol addiction? I don't know. But she was just willing to have both of those things in her consciousness and not try and shut it down. Oh, he's an alcoholic, therefore there couldn't be any good qualities, or vice versa. And so I think that was really good instruction, especially for your path. It's like, you don't want to ruin your relationship with your teacher, even if maybe something you see as, a problem. You don't have to now say, well, what I had with that person is invalid. You don't have to ruin the relationship and blessing that you got from that person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To be a practitioner, you have to be kind of a mature person. You can't be a child. We don't live in that world. And so you don't want to check your mind at the door, so to speak. You need to be able to hold simultaneously things that disagree with each other, right? Hey, in the case of Trungpa Rinpoche, it's no surprise to anyone, he was an alcoholic, he was a drug addict, and he was an amazing being. Now, I have lots of friends who knew him personally and received incredible teachings, traveled with him, all sorts of things. And they have wild, crazy stories too. And almost without a doubt, all of them have a kind of pure devotion. Some are in a kind of denial about it, but most of them can do what Pema Chodron was doing, hold both at the same time. How can it be? In the same way that I can be a real jerk sometimes, and I can also be really nice sometimes. Hey, it's amazing, right? They may be much more above us, but they also they're humans, and they're in their bodies. And we need to be able to hold both these understandings at the same time, not saying, oh, that stuff is just not true. That leads to all kinds of problems, but also not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to use an old phrase, where we just like, oh, because they acted like an ordinary person in this one situation, then they're totally not worth following. If you're like that, you're going to have trouble in life generally, but especially in the Vajrayana.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Joe, for talking with me about devotion. I think this is such an amazing topic and interesting topic, and something we committed to talking about. And the other thing I realized during our conversation that we promised we'd talk about is aspirations. And we touched on it a little bit, but I think we have room for a whole another episode. So that we'll put on the docket as well. Thank you all for listening. If you enjoy our podcast, please like, share, subscribe, all those things. If you're interested in a specific topic, please comment, let us know that you have an interest in us discussing that. And yeah, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.